old Henry wasn't far off. People raced every type of car they could get their hands on. Production cars, hot rods, and custom-built race cars. They raced on country roads, dirt tracks, and city streets. And safety was of little or no concern. Ernest Hemingway once said, "There are only three sports: bullfighting, mountain climbing, and motor racing. All the rest are merely games." Racing was extremely dangerous, and unfortunately, many a driver lost his life during these early years of the sport. However, after World War II ended, racing became more organized. The 50s and 60s saw the beginning of rules targeting safety, and production cars were fitted with roll cages to protect drivers during severe wrecks. And none too soon. Muscle cars of the late 60s were being souped up to over 500 horsepower, and speeds were skyrocketing. Today's vintage racing is far safer than the old days. However, with speeds sometimes exceeding 150 miles per hour and adrenaline pumping wheel-to-wheel excitement, things can get scary in a hurry. Most of the time, it's nothing more than a spin-out with no harm done. But occasionally, a simple mistake turns into an expensive weekend. Everyone's familiar with circle track racing, and drag racing is the most common type of motorsport in the country. However, racing vintage cars on road courses is a little-known sport. It requires far more driver skill than either circle track or drag racing, and it resurrects a simpler time when regular folk could work on their own cars. In fact, it attracts people from all walks of life. Today's version of vintage racing involves mostly classic sports cars and sedans from the 50s, 60s, and 70s. However, exotic-looking, purpose-built race cars are also common. Most are cars everyone can relate to: Mustangs, Jaguars, Cougars, Porsches, Camaros, Corvettes, and many more. Large national events even attract pre-World War II models and iconic race cars from the modern era. A vintage race is basically a really cool car show on steroids. The rules concerning car prep are very specific. Cars are required to be built basically the same now as they were in period. That means the same body, chassis, brakes, transmission, engine, and wheels that were specified decades ago. To keep the racing close and competitive, cars are separated into groups according to size and horsepower. You will often see similar cars pitted together in the paddock because each race group has its own personality. In fact, the cars are typically grouped the same now as they were in the old days. This makes for fantastic looking starting grids. And of course, the racing is as exciting as the cars are beautiful. The groups start with entry-level formula cars that can cost as little as $9,000. These are a fantastic way to get started in vintage racing and probably deliver the most fun per dollar of any race group. The next step up is the small production cars. These are mid-price cars that can be bought for around $15,000 for a basic model. This group is dominated by British sports cars such as MGs, Mini Coopers, Austin Healey's, Sprites, and Triumphs. Then we come to the mid-size sedans. Things are starting to get more expensive now as we see such marquee names as Porsche, Datsun, BMW, and Alfa Romeo. Loud and fast, the brutal big-bore production cars are always the crowd favorites. These start around $30,000 and can climb to well over $100,000 for rare models such as Shelby Mustangs. Examples include Camaros, Corvettes, Porsches, and Javelins. And occasionally, we get to see rare exotics that can cost hundreds of thousands or even millions of dollars. As you can imagine, there is a car, a group, and a price level for anyone interested in vintage racing. To keep things affordable, a typical race lasts only 20 to 30 minutes. Therefore, a single person can serve as the mechanic, head crew chief, race car hauler and transporter, and of course, the most important position, race car driver. So, who are these modern-day thrill seekers? They are ordinary people, dentists, accountants, military vets, firemen. They are people who love and appreciate cars from a simpler time. They are people who understand the cars are the stars. I'm Mark McKillier, and I've been vintage racing for over 12 years. I built my current race car, a 1971 big block Corvette, from the ground up. And when I say ground up, I mean literally every single nut and bolt on the entire car. I've raced with numerous vintage clubs at some of the finest tracks in the country, and I've experienced many of the highs and lows you're going to see here.
Well, guess what? It doesn't always work out the way you planned it. So no telling, I'm gonna have to check it out. It could be some trash in the carburetor. It could be the fuel filter's clogged up. I have no idea, but I mean, it was running great until it wasn't. Yeah. See them squirt? Well, no oil shooting out, no liquids dripping. I have no idea what's the matter with this car. It's in one piece. And I had a good time for what, 3 laps? 4 laps.
There are over 24 regional clubs around the country. However, the Sports Car Vintage Racing Association is the only nationwide group, and they put on 16 races a year in 11 different states. This week, SVRA hosts over 500 race cars from 45 states at the historic Indianapolis Motor Speedway. The 2.5-mile road course features 2 long straights and 14 turns. The amount of work that goes into an event this size is monumental. Over 170 professionals and volunteers are needed to pull it off. We're going to follow 2 interesting characters. The first is Dr. Gene Hassel. Gene is not only a dentist, he's my dentist. Not only does Gene have all the latest and coolest technology, but he may be the only lovable dentist in the entire country. Gene drives a beautiful 1968 Mustang he built from the ground up. In fact, he built it in my garage unbeknownst to his wife. But that's another story. We are in Gene's garage with only 10 days until the big race.
And then you got to put the exhaust back on, the headers back on. You're redoing your fuel line.
Bell housing, clutch, pressure plate, flywheel, all the clutch linkage.
Almost nothing. What could possibly go wrong?
It'll all just fall into place. I think until I got into this racing and got around and got to know all the guys in the club, I rated my mechanical ability with a car. On a 1 to 10 scale, I'd put me up around an 8 or a 9. I thought I was really smart. 8 or 9, no, we're kind of in the 4 to 5 range. This is kind of average. Ouch. I wasn't quite as good as I thought I was.
These cars are a beating. I tell you, it'll go away in a day or two.
Getting ready for a race weekend. We've got all these things. If I've made any changes to the car, I might spend 40 hours just messing with the darn car before it's ready to load in the trailer. And then we get the car and you got to get it loaded in the trailer. And I live in a house where my trailer's out at the street. I've got to park the car, get the trailer on the street, move the car out of the driveway and around the block and into the trailer, and then getting the trailer hooked up to the car. It's like, you know, we can figure out the more complicated stuff, but we have to do all this stuff ourselves. And so, you know, I've hooked the truck up to the trailer, I don't know, 50 times now. And it's like, it's not one of those things I want to learn how to do good. So every time I hook it up, it takes forever. It's like, you know, anybody that watches me do this has just got to laugh. It's like, you know, a backup camera would be real handy. But my driving skill has probably improved as far as race car driving skill, it's probably improved 600% since I started, and I'm still about a 4. You know, I've come to realize that I'm a much better dentist than I am race car mechanic and race car driver. And I am never going to quit my day job.
The second featured driver is Jim Cottle. Jim is a firefighter and the oldest of 4 brothers. Incredibly, all 4 brothers are firefighters and vintage racers. Jim is an accomplished mechanic and built his most recent race car, a gorgeous 1969 small block Corvette, about 3 years ago. A fast and serious competitor, Jim has entered the feature Pro-Am race on Sunday. Jim often travels with his brother and fellow racer, Bob Cottle.
Now, how long have you guys been firefighters?
29 years for me.
I'll be 28 years next January.
Oh, how cool is that?
I've been married 15 years. My wife and Kim and I, no pets, no kids. I had a vintage Corvette that I ran from 96 on with CVAR, which was our local club down at Texas World Speedway mostly, and did really well down there. And then I branched off and went SCCA GT1 racing in an old Trans Am car.
Stuff.
Yeah, it was real serious. And
that's a tube-frame chassis car.
Yeah,
and it's
and
bigger
it was
horsepower.
Serious money.
What kind of spares do y'all bring with you?
Usually brakes, rear ends, half shafts, drive shafts,
Transmissions, engine parts, all complete valve train.
You bring everything except to hold another car.
Just nearly.
That's
just
amazing.
Nearly.
How often do you think you end up having to wrench on your car on a weekend? What percentage?
Depends on the weekend.
Yeah.
Last year here, we ended up wrenching on his car to where we changed the rear end, the transmission, clutch, pressure plate.
Sounds like you need to change the driver too.
Today is a busy day. We got one session of practice and then a qualifying session. We have to change some brake pads. We got to mount some tires. We got to change tires on the car. Be a busy day.
We pick back up with Gene just after the first practice session of the first day.
We've got engine problems, and it's something really minor that's causing it to not run, and I can't figure out if it's electronic or gas. I'm pretty sure it's electronic. So the short answer is bad gas. You can see the water is heavier than the gas, so you can throw it in a bottle like this, and in about a minute it'll totally separate. It'll go to the bottom. But the fuel cell pulls from the bottom, so it's the first thing to go into the carburetor.
It's taken most of the day for Gene to solve and fix his problem. And now, he only has 15 minutes to get to the starting grid for his afternoon qualifying session.
All right, brother. Do good. That was great that it was such a simple thing. That's really lucky.
Now it's time for Gene to put the hammer down and see what his car can do. He has a 20-minute qualifying session along with 50 other cars. The single best lap time for each car will set their starting position for the next day's race.
How's it going?
Good morning. It's good, man. First session out. Looking forward to practice. The little bit of change they made in the track. Anticipating it. I think it'll be good.
It's Jim's turn now. Jim is far more serious about racing than Gene, and he pushes his car to the limits on every turn of every lap. His goal is to shave a few tenths of a second off his lap times with each consecutive lap. But things don't always go as planned.
Yeah, I stuck behind one of those cars that's real fast in a straight line, but real slow everywhere else. I'm sliding off, straight off into the gravel trap. I had to pick it up to get it out. Now I gotta check everything underneath and make sure everything's still where it's supposed to be. You gotta check everything. The rocks will get in the brakes, the rocks will get in the suspension components and the shifter. And I bet the car probably weighs 2 pounds more than it did before I hit the gravel. When you jump on the brakes that hard, the car keeps going and the wheels stop spinning, and what you do is you grind off the tire. It's no longer round, it's closer to square. I walk over here and drop another $500 for 2 more front tires so that was $250 a lap in tires right there. Ever since I was a little kid, one of my earliest memories was going to the races with my dad. And there were 2 dragsters doing a burnout, and they smoked the tires all the way down the racetrack. And I can remember to this day thinking, oh, I like this. I get to spend every spare nickel I can get my hands on going and playing race car driver. Fast cars and fast boats and fast airplanes and everything fast is what I've always loved. That's why I do it. Woo.
It's amazing how much work is needed to keep these old cars running when subjected to the extreme abuses they see on a racetrack. Trust me, it's not just Gene and Jim experiencing problems. Sometimes the starter goes bad. Frequently it's the carburetor. Occasionally, the wiring under the dash needs just a little tweaking. Replacing the transmission is always a big pain in the butt. The entire engine has to come out on rare occasions, and sometimes it's just a complete mystery. You just never know what will break next. Gene also has a brother that races. His name is Tom, and he's been experiencing all types of problems with his 1965 Mustang.
Let's see what's on there. It's got oil leak coming from somewhere. I got a gasket that's not holding. You have an oil leak that's coming into the car? It's come somehow finding a way in.
I'm gonna clean this thing up so I know where the next oil leak is. You know, fix one, it pops out another place. Yeah.
This is like Abbott and Costello. And they're going to be driving in a 90-minute enduro race tomorrow.
So far, it's endured about 90 seconds.
I was trying to get my grandson to change the muffler bearings, and he said, Grandpa, you don't need to change the muffler bearings, not this trip. What about the blinker fluid? Was the blinker fluid?
Blinker fluid was low.
Talk to us about your brother's car. What happened today?
Oh, he had a little episode where he had a stuck throttle.
Hey, now wait a minute.
Full wide open throttle.
I'm going to smash the camera. Get over here. Get over here. What happened?
No, you can't do this, Mark.
What? What do you mean I can't do this? I want to hear about the wood in your motor. Do you use wood?
That's right, the wood.
Do you put 2x4s inside your engine compartment?
A wood-fired booster in the motor.
Dude, really? Look at here. There the 2x4 is. There's the grandson working. So 2 weeks ago, a piece of 2x4 fell behind the motor. And now you're 1,000 miles away at Indianapolis Motor Speedway, and it gets lodged in this throttle linkage with the throttle wide open going into a turn.
That's a pretty good description.
I thought I did a good job wrapping things up for you there.
By comparison, our trailer is kind of a Grapes of Wrath trailer. We've applied to a TV show where they do these makeovers, and we're hoping to get accepted, so we'll see what happens.
Even after the racing stops, there is still plenty of fun to be had and trophies to be handed out. A typical night at the track involves lots of picnic-style parties, and more importantly, plenty of adult beverages. But vintage racing is about far more than wheel-to-wheel excitement. It's about camaraderie and new friendships. Gene and Tom are about to co-drive in Saturday's big feature contest, a rare endurance race. Can they ride their Mustang hard for 90 grueling minutes without a breakdown? The odds makers say no. In fact, Gene hasn't even left the starting grid, and something is already wrong. A forgotten rag, used to clean up the ever-present oil leak, has caught fire. The plan is for Gene to start the race, then come in at the halfway mark to change drivers and take on gas. After a quick warm-up lap, they get the green flag and the racing begins. Gene is having problems holding off the faster cars, and when he misses a downshift, things get a little too exciting. After collecting himself, Gene points a faster car by on his right side and continues the race. As you can see, this 90-minute endurance race includes all sorts of cars from every group, including modern-day race cars, and most are much faster than their 50-year-old Mustang. Gene's not the only driver having problems. every car is waved off the track and directed to the hot pits.
So what do you think happened?
Oh, I think he blew the hell out of his motor. It was like a fog screen coming down the front straight. I couldn't believe it. I looked up in the mirror. I think I was on fire.
A blown motor dumps 2 gallons of oil down the front straight, and it takes special equipment to clean it up. After a 20-minute delay, the cars are sent back out to continue the race. Gene is pedaling as fast as he can and does his best to keep from being passed, but it doesn't take long before corner workers notice something is wrong with the number 16 car. Gene is called back into the pits while the other cars continue racing. As the track officials check under the car, Gene realizes that the pesky oil leak has come back. He is told to fix it before he can continue the race. Gene thinks it will be a quick fix, so he decides to pull into the nearby garages while the race continues without him. Gene and his crew drain the oil catch can and then quickly wipe down the car as best as they can.
He's just puking oil into the overflow container.
Although it's not exactly a NASCAR quality pit stop, the team gets the job done, and Gene scrambles to don his helmet and gloves, then straps in and attaches the steering wheel. They have lost precious time repairing their broken Mustang, but all is not lost. Hoping this will solve their problem, Gene heads back out to continue the race. Avoiding curious spectators along the way, it's a frustratingly slow, long path back to pit lane. After finally exiting pit lane and melding back onto the track, Gene rejoins the race, only to find himself in front of some incredibly fast modern-day race cars. We've reached the halfway mark, and Gene comes in for the required 5-minute pit stop and driver change. As Tom climbs in, I have a quick interview with Gene.
Well, did it run okay after you fixed
Yeah,
it?
it ran fine. Got that oil out of there, but it's going to keep leaking. See how far it goes before they see it.
Once again, the crack pit crew jumps into action. They had 5 gallons of gas. After receiving a few last-minute instructions from his brother, Tom pulls away and heads out down pit lane. It's Tom's turn at the wheel now, and he quickly encounters heavy traffic and much faster cars. Even while being passed left and right, Tom is having the time of his life, because it's not about who wins or loses, it's about the thrill of the race.
Where did I finish?
Yeah.
Well, probably last, but there's a difference between last and dead last. So I wasn't really that worried. I just wanted to have a good time and stay on the track. It was a little bit on the scary side for me because I haven't been around track cars that were like real Indy cars before. I scrambled as fast as I could. 72 years old, you can't scramble real fast. I T-boned the tire barrier they had, so pushed one tire out onto the middle of the track. But I didn't feel any damage, the car felt good, so I just kept going. Halfway down the straight, which is the fastest part of the track, my steering wheel came off. I think the first thing I said was, oh shit. But I was able to, the car stayed straight and I just was able to latch it back on again.
So the car was on fire, it lost its brakes, it locked wide open throttle,
Yeah,
and the steering wheel came off.
right.
Other than that, what else could go wrong?
Well, it's not in the trailer yet. I almost backed over a golf cart a while ago.
It's Sunday morning, and bad weather is rolling in. The big feature race of the entire week may get rained out. Jim has been looking forward to the Pro-Am for months, and his dream may get washed away. However, after a 2-hour delay, the rain finally stops, and every support vehicle at the Indy Speedway is recruited to help dry off the track as best as possible. The Pro-Am is a 60-minute race and the only one of its kind. The spectators gather around the cars on pit lane and get to meet 32 former Indy 500 drivers and their amateur partners. Jim's partner is ex-professional Bob Lazier. Bob is 77 and doesn't want to drive more than a few laps. Driving these old cars with no power steering is extremely tough. So Jim is going to drive most of the 60-minute race before handing the driving duties over to Lazier. Jim is excited about their chances because he is a talented driver and loves these slippery, wet conditions.
Man, I'm good. This is my kind of race. So I enjoy this. This is the great equalizer. The rain, it takes horsepower advantage. It takes tire, car, suspension advantage. It takes it all, throws it out. It comes down to pure driver ability and pure driver setup.
I love it. I drive it in the snow and ice all winter. I can't wait until it rains around here.
So you feel like that's going to give you a little bit of advantage with your experience?
It shouldn't be a disadvantage, okay? That my age might be a slight disadvantage, but I should be able to control it when it's a little sideways. I kind of like that, as a matter of fact.
At the last minute, the sun pops out and dries off the track before the race even starts. Cottle and Lazier no longer have the wet conditions they hoped for. The race begins with 2 warm-up laps, during which the drivers heat up the tires and fluids. And then, it's a wild dash to turn 1. Somehow, 32 race cars manage to slow from 150 miles an hour and make it around the first few turns with no major incidents. We get to see the race not only from Jim's car, but also from many other perspectives. Sometimes the racing is tight and congested, and other times things get spread out as the slower cars are caught and lapped by the front runners. It's almost impossible to keep track of what position each car is in. Jim pushes hard and develops a small lead before he comes in for the required pit stop and driver change. The only question is, can Lazier hold on to the lead and fend off his fellow pro racers for the last few laps?
Sure enough, I heard the loudspeaker say, "Looking for the 27 car coming around," and I knew then that we had really done well, but I wasn't 100% sure we had won it.
Logo in on your left car. I love it. Oh, congratulations.
Unbelievable.
You partner with him?
Yes, sir. No, I'm partnering with him. This is great.
Oh, that's the sweetest milk ever made. When the SVRA official told me we had won this thing, man, it's thrill of a lifetime. I always said if I ever won a gold medal, I wouldn't find it like everybody does, and I'm going to hold true with that. But this is gold, Budrow. It's gold.
It's amazing how much can go wrong when it comes to racing, especially with cars that are 40 to 50 years old. Only in a sport as unique as vintage racing do the casual racers get the same thrill and excitement as the most serious competitive drivers. But it's about far more than high-speed wheel-to-wheel excitement. It's about the love of old cars. Cars that bring back the nostalgia of a bygone era, of a time when cars had distinct personalities, ordinary people could work on them, and some even race them. Vintage racing truly is
fast from the past.